I think it's so important for us to look at what wild parrots are also eating and what they're observed eating in the wild to be able to mimic that in our homes. Welcome back to the Parrot Podcast. I'm your host, Sandra from Poodles and Parrots. Today's episode I'm particularly excited about because it is going to be focused specifically on parrot nutrition and diet. And I'm so excited to chat with Dr. Jason Crean. He is an expert in parrot nutrition. He studies this. We're going to get the science background of it all. He also teaches at a university. And so he is really knowledgeable in this topic. He's also been a part of many brands formulating their products for parrots. So we're going to take a little dive into that and ask him about all of those types of things as well. And we're going to get talking about raw foods, about pellets, about what parrots are observed eating in the wild, and just so much more. He's also a huge advocate for Avian Teas. So we're going to get to know why Avian Teas are important to incorporate into your bird's routine. And we're just going to chat about so much good stuff and healthy stuff. So let's jump in and chat with Dr. Jason. Dr. Jason, welcome to the Parrot Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, let's get started with you telling us a little bit about your background and what you do.
Let's see. I wear many hats. So I'm going to start with how I got into birds. So when I was 12 years old, I got my first cockatiel. And then when I was 12 years old, I got a second cockatiel. And then when I was 12 years old, I had many cockatiels because they produced. So that was my deep dive into birds, and I've had birds ever since. I have since then, I have 2 degrees in biology, 2 degrees in education, specifically around biology education. And so I have a foot in each arena because I think we live in a scientifically illiterate society. You just have to hop on Facebook to see that very quickly. So we're trying to change how we teach kids about science so that they can think critically and make some decisions. And that I see that on a daily basis, how it affects how we feed our birds, how people perceive things. Typically it's, oh, well, I heard this, or I read this on a post, so it must be true.
Yeah.
Um, and that is rampant across all animal keeping, because I specialize in animal nutrition, and I have a graduate degree in biology that specifically was on zoo and aquarium studies. So I'm looking at, how do we keep animals in managed situations, which whether it's a zoo, I'm a zoo consultant. I've consulted for zoos. I continue to do that now, specifically around nutrition and exhibit design and things like that. Or keeping animals in our home, because it's all about knowing their biology so that we can treat them the way they need to be treated. Birds are not little feathered people.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people do some damage, not knowing that they're doing damage, thinking that they're, treating them the way that they should be treated, but treating them like people does not help. And that's where I come in, knowing about the biology and trying to do better for them and giving them biologically appropriate foraging and anything that's going to keep them exhibiting those naturalistic behaviors.
Yeah. I like what you said there that, they're not little people, and sometimes people treat them that way, or sometimes people get them like from a pet store, and a pet store will tell you, you just need to feed them seeds, or the people will read something online and it's like, no, I need to only feed them this, or only feed them this type of pellets, or this
Yes.
pellet brand is telling me that 90% of their diet should be this, or,
Drives
people
me
are like,
crazy. Drives me crazy.
yeah, or like, oh, I always see birds eating bread, so let me share my pizza crust, or they want it, or they like it.
Yes.
But we are actually doing them a disservice by feeding them that way. So we're going to jump all into diet, but I know you grew up having cocktails. What about now? Do you have birds now? And what birds do you
So
have?
yes. How much time do we have? So I have graduated from just cockatiels. I don't have any cockatiels now. I have graduated to one of their closest cousins, black palm cockatoo. That's Sirius black palm cockatoo that I have, and I've had him for a few years now since he was a chick, and he's my kind of right hand bird. And
Oh,
then I have a Dubonbodes lory, sometimes called a brown lory, and those are nectar and fruit eaters. And so feeding them is a challenge sometimes. But I currently manage an aviary that has about 35 species. I have everything from, I've got 3 species of fruit doves out there from Indonesia. I have different types of finches, African waxbills, some grass finches from Australia. Um, I just added a pair of African pygmy geese, which look like little tiny ducks. And those were like a dream of mine for a long time. And I just happened to talk to a breeder recently who had some available. So those are in my quarantine area right now before I introduce them to the pond in my main aviary. Um, I have Victoria crown pigeons, which are these giant blue birds the size of turkeys with this lace crest on top of their head. Just all these different types of species. And that means that I have to be feeding many different types of birds within the same environment, which
right.
shows me that they're eating a lot more diversity than we typically think they do. So
Yeah.
they're eating things that I just don't that I didn't expect because we just assume that they're eating this because these people who have had them for a long time say they just eat this stuff. But then when they have access to all this different fresh food, we see a lot of differences. My specialty for the past 25 years has been rem-fasteds, toucans. I breed green arasaris and groove-billed toucanets right now. Those are the 2 species that I currently have. I've had all the large species and I've had a variety of them over the years, breeding wise, but those present um, those present a challenge because all of the toucan species, all of the lories and lorikeets, all starlings, myna birds, they all are prone to hemochromatosis, which is called iron storage disease. And
Yeah.
so that's how I actually got into tea because about 20 years ago, my veterinary collaborator, who's just a good friend of mine, Dr. Karen Becker, um, said, European zoos are offering teas to these animals because the tannins in teas actually keep the iron from being stored in the liver. So we should put your birds on a tea regimen. And my first toucan cricket was a little green arsari, and they're small. I mean, they're
A
130 grams.
toucanette,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
little
they're like
ones.
they're little ones, yeah. And she was diagnosed with iron storage disease. We did a little bit of phlebotomy where for 3 weeks in a row we just took some blood so that when she makes new blood cells, the iron would come out of the liver to help make those blood cells. And then we kept her alive 3.5 years beyond her diagnosis. So she passed at a ripe old age, which usually they die within months of that
Yeah.
diagnosis. So that really started us on the path of we are missing opportunities because in the 90s, I remember sitting in a room when I was working for a pet shop in high school and in early years of college, and a pet food company said, "Hey, we've got these brand new bird pellets. They're going to solve all of these health issues. They're going to take care of everything." And we were so excited. And that, years later, we're like, these caused problems. They didn't really solve anything. And so with that understanding, like we really started to look at what are these alternative foodstuffs that we have available to us that we can bring into our homes to keep our birds not just surviving, but thriving. And
Yeah.
you said earlier about the wild. The wild is a really tough place. It is not a paradise. They are constantly, watching for predators. They're eating nutrient poor foods. They're, loaded with parasites. They are surviving. But parrots are opportunistic. So they can eat all kinds of different things. They exploit any type of resource they can find that's going to help them not compete with monkeys, for example.
Yeah.
and do their best to survive in the wild. But in our homes, we can get them from surviving to thriving, which means as far away from disease as possible. We can totally give them so much more than the wild can.
Yeah. I love all the points that you touched on, and I have so many questions. But let's start with the fruit eating parrots, because I recently just learned all about toucans, and I am now obsessed with toucans, and I think that I want one day. But I know
Get a
that they
small
eat.
one, small species, not big. Big species are very difficult.
Yeah, yeah.
Small ones are manageable.
So I know that they eat a lot of fruit, and you also mentioned that you have lories, and I know they're nectar and fruit eating parrots. And I actually had somebody ask me on Instagram asking, I'd love to know more about rainbow lorikeet diets. So can you touch on a little bit about that specific type of parrot or toucans and like what their diet looks like and how much fruit do they eat? And is there other things that they eat as well?
Yeah, so for toucans versus parrots like lorikeets, toucans are mainly frugivorous. We give them I try to feed every day 12 different types of fruits. So I typically dice up fruits and seal them in containers for the week. And I give them about 12 different things. We also grow fresh flowers for them. And this, I mean, even if you're in an apartment with a little deck, you can grow them in a box, like nasturtiums. The whole plant is edible for anybody. So we try to grow flowers because flowers have a lot of health benefits as well. And those are great for lories who are exploiting flowers in the wild, right? They're consuming flowers for their pollen, their nectar, um, and also eating fruits and the seeds of fruits like papaya seeds and melon seeds, which are great for lories and lorikeets. We avoid seeds, larger seeds for toucans, but like I said, they get a lot of fruit. We give them some insect protein, which is the only type of animal protein I recommend for any bird. They don't need chicken bones. I don't know where this came from, but like mealworms, edible insects are really your best form of animal protein, the only form of animal protein that we know parrots eat in the wild, that we see birds eating in the wild. Um, and then with lories, they also get some kind of liquid nectar. I use Lori's Choice that has been used by lots of people. I work with a lot of zoos that use it too. But that way, it's a liquid diet that they can lap up. But I also add fruits to it. I'm adding flowers. I'm giving them dried flowers to forage in as well. I have a flower forage that we now sell in our store for that purpose. Any bird can do that. Any bird can use it, but I want to give lories as much foraging and keep them busy because they are high energy, active birds. So those are the main things that you have to keep in mind with those types of diets.
Yeah. And when it comes to fruit for parrots that aren't lories or toucans, I think that a lot of people also wonder like how much fruit is too much for our parrots like conures and macaws.
There's no easy answer for that because the fruits are can be so different.
Yeah, their
I
sugar
tend
content.
Yeah, and sugar, I have to say, sugar is not evil. Like the sugars that are in fruit are natural sugars that are processed differently than table sugar like sucrose that's added to some pet pellets to make it palatable. So that, like there's no place in the diet for sucrose. But if
Yeah.
you're looking at table sugar. If you're looking at, fruits, there's lots of low sugar fruits that you can feed that have huge health benefits. Every bird should be getting berries fairly regularly. They're packed with all kinds of nutrients, great bioflavonoids. Every time I think of bioflavonoids, I think of blueberries, something with a strong color. But flowers also have those too. Hibiscus flowers, great source of bioflavonoids as well. And you can use those dry or brew them as a tea. Um, but the different types of fruits, I always say 15% of the diet fruit wise is usually more than enough for most species. There's no one size fits all. Eclectus typically need more fruit. Um, that's just how they're built.
Yeah.
But when it comes to fruit, diversify. They shouldn't be getting too much of any one thing. And if you can offer it somewhat unripe, like I don't offer ripe bananas to anybody. Everybody gets green banana. And
Oh,
so green banana is great for it's a great source of prebiotic fiber that's going to help feed the microbiome in the gut, all that healthy bacteria, because that's interconnected with every body system. And the more research that comes out about the microbiome that lives in our guts, the more we're like, holy cow, it's connected to everything. And if
yeah.
that is unhappy, your body is unhappy. And that goes for any animal. So if you
Yeah.
can give them prebiotic fiber, that's going to help feed that microbiome and help it diversify. And I'm co-director of the animal nutrition lab at the university where I teach, and that's one major thing that we're looking at is what does the microbiome look like for a bird that gets fresh food like fruit and sprouts and greens versus a bird that's only or mostly on a diet that's ultra processed, like a pellet, like most
Yeah.
pellets. And we see diversification. There's lots more different things in the microbiome if they're getting whole food than if they're on a processed food. And it's the same for people. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a reason why we're told not to eat processed food. Processed food is killing us. I think Dr. Robert Lustig from the University of California, San Francisco says it best. He calls it the failed experiment. Like we were trying to feed a lot of people by producing all this processed food, and it's done nothing but hurt us. And obesity is at all-time high, and all this sort of thing. So, it goes the same for any animal. It's the same for dogs and cats. I don't recommend dry kibble. I recommend raw meat-based diets for them. It's healthy. It's biologically appropriate. They thrive on it.
Yeah.
And so when I'm asked to speak at vet schools on bird nutrition in particular, I usually slide some of those things in. But I teach animal nutrition at the university to undergraduates because we're trying to catch them before they get to vet school. Because
Right.
vets are not trained in nutrition. It's very, very basic, and it's very biased towards
Yeah.
this
And
food.
nutrition is like a huge part of like their health and their happiness. And
Yeah,
like you said earlier, in order for them to thrive. So
yeah.
let me ask you, why is proper nutrition so important for our parrots? Like we talked about the microbiome, we know they thrive, but why is it just so important? And does it have an effect on their behavior? Because I've also heard that a lot of behavioral issues can be improved with just diet. And I actually had somebody ask a question asking, can I change aggressive behavior with diet?
So behavior is often multifactorial, right? There's usually
Yeah.
many things involved. It's the same thing with like plucking and things like that. But food, nutrition is the foundation. That's what's going into the bird, and that goes for water too. So what they're eating and drinking will impact them physiologically, which then can change behavior. And we'll see, I was at a conference and I was sitting on a panel with like 4 vets, 2 conservationists, and then me. And someone said, well, isn't fresh food going to cause hormones? And the vets were like, yes, it will. And I said, that has not been my experience whatsoever. If you are all of a sudden feeding your bird a giant plate of fresh food one day and they haven't had it in a long time, right? They're going to be like, oh, what's this? And there's a sudden change in their body. Can that trigger hormones? Absolutely. But if you're consistently feeding fresh food like you should be,
Yeah.
you're not going to see that. That's not going to impact behavior. I guarantee it. Recently there's a myth perpetuated on social media about fruit in particular causing hormones and causing aggression and things like that. And I'm like, that doesn't happen. So what we need to do is think about how do we diversify the diet so that they don't get too much of any one thing. Because if they're getting too much of any one thing and you're not keeping an eye on portion size, which we can totally talk about too,
Yeah.
then they can just pick out what they want and they don't have to eat anything else. And then
Exactly.
they get angry when that food's not there, and they're going to sit and wait for you to bring them that food. So you are smarter than your birds. You may not believe that if you're listening to this, but you are smarter than your birds. You can get them eating whatever you want, with time and persistence on your part. And what I find about bird nutrition is it's often training the owners. It's not training the birds. Birds will get accustomed to eating. You have to train yourself to think they will eat this if I'm persistent and I'm engaging them in the foods in the way they should be. When it comes to I know I got off topic a little bit here, but
Yeah, that's fine.
when it comes to changing behavior, you're not going to be able to cure aggression with just diet, but offering a diet that is diverse and encourages biologically appropriate foraging. Okay, so you're getting birds to use what they've evolved to use to open up their food. Tree nuts are another one that gets a bad rep. Tree nuts are incredibly nutritious and appropriate for parrots. Should you be giving them 27 walnuts a day? No. But their beak is made for that, and the nutrition in a single walnut is unparalleled. It's a great source of omega-3 fatty acids, which reduce inflammation in the body, and that's hard to get into the diet for us, let alone birds. And it also has proteins, minerals, all kinds of different things. So I think when it comes to aggression, you can definitely create a healthy foundation that will probably make it easier to work with your bird through undesirable behaviors. Um, that that is probably the best way to do it, because nutrition, like you said, it's the foundation. Like it's what we're putting into them, and
Yeah.
it means everything. And birds spend a ton of time foraging.
Yeah.
Like they're not flying miles and miles and miles every day for fun, right?
Yeah.
They want to fly only when they have to. They don't do it for fun. It's too much of an energy waste. So they climb around trees. They're looking for food. If you want to get your bird exercising, flying may not be the answer. It may be climbing and things like that. Flying's great when if you can do that, but getting them to move in any way. So using a skewer to impale fruits and veggies on, and getting them to eat from a skewer and things like that, that will occupy their time and keep them from engaging in undesirable behaviors, screaming, plucking, those types of things. So you
Yeah.
can definitely change behavior by changing out what their day is like and giving them better nutrition to help that foundation, for
Yeah.
everything else.
Yeah, I actually talk about foraging a lot because I think it's so important and it's something that they naturally do. It's physically like exercise for them, it's mentally stimulating,
Yeah.
and it's them searching for food. So I always try to provide different types of foraging opportunities. And I also think that it's incredibly important to also be creative with how we offer them their food. Like you were saying, use a skewer or like get these different mind games or use a bowl and cover it and put stuff on top so that they have to look for it, and switch it up, not only what they're eating every single day, but how you're offering it so it's not always the same. And I think that that is like a huge key in our parrots also being happy. um Now, I wanted to ask you because I think that this is also something that a lot of people struggle with. And I've had this question a lot as well, is like, if your bird is on an all seed or an all pellet or like an all fruit or mainly fruit and seed diet at the moment, I think a lot of people struggle with transitioning them to eating a diverse diet. And I know there's like a lot of tips and tricks, offering it chunky, offering it diced, offering it on a skewer, or like mashing it in some sweet potato, or there's baking it in birdie bread and all these different things. So I wanted to get your tips on, like, if someone's wondering how to transition their bird to eat more foods and diversify their diet, how can they do that?
So I will start by saying that keeping birds is a scientific experiment that never ends. You are constantly experimenting, you're constantly trying new things to see what your bird will, come to. Um, Cooking is definitely not the answer. I don't recommend heating food of any kind for any reason. And mainly because you lose nutrients in some form, even if it makes the food a little bit more digestible, it's still losing nutrients, but cooked food spoils much, much faster.
Yeah.
Cooked rice, Bacillus cereus shows up on rice within 2 hours. That has killed people who have eaten, like leftover Chinese food the next day and didn't refrigerate it. So, like that quickly, that bacteria can form and kill. And I guarantee birds have died, and people just
Don't
say,
know.
"Oh, my bird died." And how many people get necropsies on their birds, right? So, that can kill your bird very, very quickly. So I don't recommend cooking food at all, heating food of any kind. It's just not necessary. Birds are incredibly resilient. They eat a lot of tough stuff in the wild that's nutrient poor, that has anti-nutrients in it. They can eat what we want them to eat raw. Now, that being said, birds are hungriest in the morning. I recommend pulling any food at nighttime right before bed. They don't need food at night. They are not getting, as soon as those lights go off, their brain shuts down because it's directly connected to the optic nerves. And as soon as light starts to decrease, their brain starts to go to bed.
Yeah.
Um, sort of like people. So, but much, much, much harder. But they do not need food at night. So the very, very first thing they should see in the morning is that fresh food. Soaked and sprouted items you get a lot of benefit for minimum work. You can soak and sprout things within 24 hours and have nutrient rich food that's appropriate for them to eat that quickly. Um, Chopped greens, microgreens, which you can grow on a windowsill within a
Yeah.
week. And those little tiny greens have huge health benefits, more so than if they ate like a big adult kale leaf, for example. Those
Yeah.
microgreens
It's like
are
50
so
times the
nutrient
nutrients
dense.
or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, there's just a lot packed into those little leaves. And so, and if you think about the nature of a seed plant, seeds have these packets of protein and fats and starches that they need to jumpstart growth because they don't have leaves to do photosynthesis and generate their own energy yet. So seeds
Yeah.
are really beneficial to feed because seeds are packed with all kinds of stuff. Seeds are not empty calories. I don't care. I don't care how many times people keep perpetuating that on social media. Seeds are good as part of the diet. Nothing should be the predominant part of a diet. You
Yeah.
should be diversifying so that they're used to lots of different things. So in the morning, they should be getting the foods that are the most beneficial, soaked and sprouted items, fruits and veg, things like that. I also offer tea instead of water in the morning. So
Oh,
different types of bird teas that I've been formulating for the last 20 years include different types of leaves, flowers, roots, all of these things that science has showed us have health benefits. We can blend for specific things. So I've got a blend that's called Plumage Perfection that is for, helps birds that are pluckers or have skin issues, things like that, because there is calendula in there, which has been shown to improve skin quality. It has a compound called calendulin that is actually really beneficial, but it's a golden flower, so it has beta carotene. So now you've got nutrients coming in through the water as well.
yeah.
Different
Amazing.
types of flowers, chamomile, lavender, calming. All of our birds could use some calming. So,
Yeah.
that helps balance the nervous system. It doesn't dope them up. It just helps balance the nervous system. So there's lots of different things that you can use, but I want to give them a tea when I'm giving them fresh food in the morning. Later in the day, when I pull whatever's left, after work, after the work day, for example, then I will give them some dry food. And that will include some seeds. It'll include some tree nuts, depending on the bird and the size of the bird and that sort of thing. Um, and then dried veg, dried fruits, whatever I want to mix together that day, um, to keep them guessing. I don't want to give them the same thing every day. Some people think that it's cruel, like to surprise your bird with something brand new because they're so accustomed or used to something, right? That is not the case. You got to keep them guessing so that they never know what's coming. Because if they do know what's coming, they will sit and wait for it. And then you're going to, that's going to decrease the diversity that they're actually going to eat. So feeding in the morning, you're going to get birds trying things. Mixing it with foods they recognize may also be, a critical piece, but your bird's not going to starve during the day. It will get something later in the day, that it recognizes if it's not eating the fresh food in the morning, but they should only have that fresh food in the morning. They shouldn't have food left over from the night before. They should have fresh food in the form of live food, fruits, veggies, microgreens, sprouts, whatever it may be, all together, in the morning, and then give them dry food at night.
Okay. I love that you answered my next question before I even asked it, because I was going to ask you, what should their like daily diet consist of? Because a lot of the information online, when you dig in and you're like, okay, what should my bird be eating? It's like fresh chop in the morning and then pellets in the evening, and then reserve those fruits and nuts for treats. But based on all of this, it's kind of like you need to switch it up. And I always say that, like, you need to switch up the chop. Like the chop that you're offering in the morning, it can't be the same every single time. You want to switch it up every single time. Switch up those veggies, switch up those legumes, switch up those grains, so it's not always the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you offer in the afternoon the dried food, you talked about seeds, you talked about dried veggies and fruits. And recently, I used to offer dehydrated until I learned about freeze dried. So now I offer Mia freeze dried fruit veggie mixes. I actually recently got the Mikey and Mia freeze dried mix
Yeah.
for Little
Yeah.
Beaks.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to ask you, do you use freeze dried or dehydrated when you talk about the dried fruits and veggies?
The answer is yes. So
Both?
there's different there's definitely different things. Freeze dried I know is expensive, and I know because I have 3 freeze dryers, and they, like, just to run one batch of freeze dried food, because I just put together a blend that we sell that has freeze-dried palm nuts and bananas and plantains and banana leaf, papaya. Some of these we grow ourselves here. Green mango, green guava, things like that. That was 6 days of freeze drying for one batch of that mix. So, like, it's expensive
Yeah.
because it takes a lot of energy to do. Now, freeze drying, though, has huge benefits because it maintains about 95% of nutrients. So it flash freezes, and then traps the nutrients. So you're not losing
Mhm.
them through oxidation, which in dehydration, it takes time. They're sitting out, and you know they're not vacuumed, so oxygen is present, and it's going to age things faster. So you're going to lose up to 50% usually of nutrient in dehydrated. Does that mean you shouldn't feed dehydrated? No. If that's what you have access to, that's a benefit. They're just not going to get as much from it as they would freeze drying. Freeze drying generally gives you food that's crunchy or rubbery depending on the item. um, so sometimes it's a texture thing with birds too. So, that's something else to consider. But freeze drying is definitely better. It's just more expensive.
Okay. Um, when you were talking about soaking and sprouting, what are some types of foods that you like to soak and sprout to offer birds?
So soaking and sprouting, I highly recommend trying to get a mix that's made for birds,
Okay.
because those typically all can be soaked and sprouted together. Now, I have seen people drive themselves crazy over, well, I have to soak this for 12 hours, but this has to be soaked for 24, and then this has to be soaked for 18, and this has to, no. Stop micromanaging. It's much easier than this. If you get a mix that's made for birds, typically it will have things in it that are seeds, grains, and legumes, that are safe to sprout. There's not a ton of legumes that are safe to sprout. The only beans, for example, you should soak and sprout are mung beans, adzuki beans, and garbanzo beans or chickpeas. Those are the
Okay.
only beans. Then any type of lentil is great, and peas are great. Those are great legumes, great protein. but you do not want to buy, you don't want to offer your bird the 15 bean soup mix at the grocery store. Those have to be cooked, and if you have to annihilate them with boiling water, they're not worth feeding. Don't cook. So just soak and sprout the beans that you can, which are mung adzuki, and then the chickpeas, the garbanzo beans. Those are super simple. If you're using a sprouter, I use the Easy Sprouter because it has two-way airflow. And it's basically, if you look up Easy Sprout, it's a container that has a strainer cup inside of another cup. And then when you lift it up, it sits on a ledge. So the air can get underneath instead of like a mason jar where air goes in and comes out the
Mm-hmm.
same way. This gets my sprouts. I can sprout with about twice as fast with the Easy.
Wow.
It's super quick. And so I soak for 12 hours, I sprout for 12 hours, and I feed. And I make a batch for a week and I keep it in a sealed container, a truly sealed container. And if you want to know if your containers are actually sealed, put some water in them and flip them upside down. That'll tell you if they're if they're actually sealed or not. But I can keep fresh sprouts in a container. I mix my dried green forage with it, which is a lot of dried herbs that soaks up the moisture and also keeps them fresh. Because stuff like oregano and thyme have compounds that are antimicrobial, antifungal, so they actually keep food fresher longer. And then the birds eat them because they're loaded with antioxidants. So it's like a win-win. So I can do that, make a big batch for a week and then just take it out of the refrigerator and use what I need for the day. But seeds, grains, legumes, you want to diversify what you're sprouting. But once again, portion control is everything. Because if you give them a ton of sprouts in a day, I've seen people give like these giant bowls of food to a cockatiel, and I'm like, it's going to eat like 6 bites from that, and then you're wasting all that food. But
Yeah.
there's people are so afraid their birds are going to starve, and I'm like, a cockatiel needs a heaping tablespoon of fresh food in the morning. Like,
Yeah.
think about the size of this bird. It's not
Yeah.
eating half a pound of food. It's
Yeah.
you're lucky if it's 100 grams itself. So um, any of those things you can soak and sprout, but I really recommend diversifying so that there's lots of things in every spoonful you're giving. But what's beautiful about that is every time you take a spoonful, it's a totally randomized complement of what's on that spoon than the day before or the day after. So
Right.
diversifying helps a lot.
Yeah, I love that. And for anybody that's listening, we'll get into the portion control and the portions next, but for anyone that's listening and is like, "Okay, I want to get a bird blend that I can sprout and soak." Do you have any recommendations? I know you post a lot of biodiversity bird blends. Do they have a blend for this?
Yeah, we use China Prairie, and
Okay.
China Prairie has a micrograin blend that is for small birds, a cytosine blend, which is for large birds. And then I formulated a Thrive blend for them that has where you can literally just soak it overnight, rinse it in the morning, and feed it as is. You can also
Beautiful.
sprout it, but it's just soaking. So there's like split lentils in there and things like that that you can just um, soak overnight, and then it's ready for you in the morning.
Yeah, beautiful. I actually read in one of your articles that you had said by always keeping the bird's physiology guessing with various food sources helps to avoid complacency and dependency on individual food items, which is what we've been talking about. And that line really stuck out to me because I'm like, it's so true. Like, we need to feed them different foods and really diversify their diet. I mean, ourselves, if we were just to eat like the same thing every single day, the same cereal for breakfast and the same pizza for dinner, we would eventually get bored and tired of it. And also, our bodies wouldn't thrive, our microbiome, and so on.
Well, and
So,
it's certainly not going to thrive on pizza, right? Like,
yeah,
you also have to
or any
consider what's
processed
healthy.
foods.
Yes, and people, Dr. Becker always says, like, food is love, you know, and it shouldn't be, right? So, like, we think we're doing our birds a service because, oh, they really want some pasta. Pasta's not a
Yeah.
health food. Pasta's not healthy for us. I don't care what type of pasta it is. It's not healthy for us. It's not healthy for them. So, giving them food because we feel bad or they're guilting us into it, you are smarter than your bird. You are smarter than your bird. Say that every morning in the mirror 3 times so that you know I am smarter than my bird, because they need healthy nutrition. They have a tiny body, and every biteful can have an impact on them in the short term and or long term. So I see a lot of people justify poor food choices as it's just a treat or it's just once in a while. That little bite can have a big impact on them. It can trigger things in the liver that can start a long-term effect. You do not want to don't treat your bird with unhealthy food. There's hundreds of things you could be giving your bird to eat that are healthy. So don't give them people food, like, unless it's healthy people food and you know it's healthy people food.
Speaking of pasta, do you think that that's something that could or should be included in a chop? Because I've seen that as well before.
No.
No.
Cooked food spoils faster, and pasta's part of that. So I don't offer any kind of pasta.
Okay. Let's jump into portion sizes and portion control because I'm sure that's going through everybody's minds. I know you mentioned that for a small bird like a cockatiel, a tablespoon of food is enough food for them. So, depending on the size of your bird, what should the portion be, or how do you figure out the portion?
So you start with a foundation and then you go from there. So for small birds, budgies, cockatiels, little conures, start with a heaping tablespoon of fresh food, soaked sprouts, chopped, microgreens, that type of thing. And then if they eat all of that fairly quickly, and I mean most of it, like they're really exploiting. They're not just picking out four things and then sitting and waiting, right? They need to be that they and you can leave that food out all day. It's not going to go bad in a day. It's fresh food. Plants have natural defenses. Cooked food is where we destroy the defenses, and that's why it goes bad quicker. So fresh food, don't worry about leaving that out. That's a myth. When it comes to um, medium-sized birds, so um, Kayaks on up, let's just say, because Kayaks are high energy and they're also stockier and they have a
Yeah.
more body weight on them, through like Amazon sized birds, for the most part. Some of the larger Amazons are bigger birds, but um, two heaping tablespoonfuls of fresh food in the morning. And then the equivalent of dry food at night. So if you're doing 1 tablespoon of fresh food, then a tablespoon at night would be a great way to start. Once again, this is a foundation. If your bird's eating most of the diversity in that spoonful, you can always add a little bit more. But you want to make sure they're eating the diversity that they need. And they're not going to get everything they need in a pellet. I don't care what the bag says about nutritionally complete. That is impossible to do with the hundreds of parrot species we're keeping. You can't do it. One size does not fit all. And offering different pellets is not diversifying. That's just adding more processed food into the diet. So we want to avoid that too. So, and then larger birds, 3 tablespoons with a couple of nuts, in the diet every day. And by a couple, I mean like a walnut and a pecan. That's a lot of nut for a macaw or an Amazon. Um, could you do 3 or 4 nuts? Yeah, but a nut or 2 nuts a day or around there is usually what is usually good enough. That gives them everything they need for the day, and more. So 1 tablespoon, 2 tablespoons, 3 tablespoons. That's typically where I start, and then you can always add a little bit more. But you got to make sure that they're eating the diversity of foods that you're offering. So if they eat some stuff and then they're done after an hour or two, they'll probably come back to it later when they get hungry again. But think about like the size of their crop, how much food can actually fit in there, and then how they process that through the day, through the rest of their digestive system. They don't need Birds are not gorging themselves on food in the wild because it makes them heavy, and then they can't fly away from predators. Like that wouldn't make any sense. So, we
Yeah.
definitely need to keep in mind that, the diversity is important. It needs to be whole, fresh food and not processed pellets. And then, give them a portion size that's appropriate twice a day. And if you're home during the day, you can give them a midday meal, like a little bit extra fresh food or something like that, dependent upon, have they really eaten what you've offered in the morning.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that. And when it comes to like this diet that we're talking about and these portions, um, I know we're specifically talking about parrots, but is this diet, I'm sure everybody's wondering, like from any kind of bird, from like a budgie to a macaw, that we're feeding the fresh food in the morning and then the dry mix in the evening or the
Yes,
afternoon? Okay.
absolutely. Mhm.
Let's touch a little bit about pellets because you talked about pellets, and I know that pellets are a very popular topic. I had somebody ask on specific pellet brands, and I know which pellet brand you advocate for and feed and talk about, but let's jump into pellets. Tell me, what do you think about pellets? I know that they're processed and we don't want to be feeding things that are, exposed to heat, and we've already talked about processed foods. And in actually another one of your articles, you said the key is to offer unprocessed, unheated food in its whole form so that the nutrients are available to the cells that compose their bodies. So tell us about pellets and if we should be feeding them, and if so, which brand and how much or how often?
So there is heat is a major issue. Synthetic vitamins are another issue. And synthetic vitamins, how can I explain this best? When we're consuming whole food, we're not only consuming really important nutrients, but also other compounds that help our bodies assimilate them, take them in, break them down, and then they go through our blood, animals' bloodstream to all their cells and are distributed so that they can be reassembled into the cells they need. So you are literally what you eat, right? If you eat chicken, you don't become a chicken. You break down the proteins and the fats in chicken into pieces that then the cells can reassemble into proteins that are human or parrot so that their cells can continue to divide and grow and make new cells. Synthetic vitamins, you're missing out on all kinds of different things. So some synthetic vitamins, and I just did a talk with I just did a webinar with an avian vet in Illinois, Dr. Jamie Abedi, and she has said it doesn't matter what the pellet is, she still sees vitamin A deficiencies in birds. So they need beta carotenes from whole food, okay, red, yellow, orange vegetables, for example, that then their cells can turn into vitamin A in the body. But the synthetic vitamins are not as beneficial as you can get from whole food, the actual nutrients and all of the things that come along with it. So whole food, there's a reason that it's healthier. There's a reason that whole food in general doesn't make you gain weight and become obese. It's because you're getting what you need and your body's recognizing it as food, as nutrients that it can then use and not like just urinating them out when you take a multivitamin, for example, where you lose a lot because
Yeah.
your body just doesn't know what to do with it. Are there some synthetic vitamins that are beneficial? There are a few, but in general, like you want to be getting this stuff from your food, and it's got to be whole food and not synthetic vitamins. Now, that being said, so we've got the heating issue and we've got the synthetic um, vitamin issue. So the only pellet that I can recommend is Tops because Tops is cold pressed. They make no claims that they are complete nutritionally because there's no such thing, but they use alfalfa, which is a great source of complete protein. And it's all whole food and no synthetic vitamins. So there's a lot of benefit to that as part of the diet. And it's not 70% of the diet. It's, a portion of the diet with all of this other whole food stuff that you want. And I see people denigrating it because it smells like alfalfa. I'm like, what's wrong with alfalfa? Alfalfa is a great food. Like it's really beneficial. So I don't know why people are all up in arms about it. But that in and of itself, no synthetic vitamins, and it's cold pressed, so it's not heated. You can see the food in the pellet. That's really beneficial. So and other pellets, it's funny to me because some pellets will make claims about um oh this is better than seed, like sunflower seeds or peanuts, and yet when you look at the label there's sunflower seeds and peanuts in the food. So like, I think there's a lot of problems with that. And unfortunately, like I said, veterinarians are not adequately trained in nutrition, animal nutrition generally. Veterinarians are critically important to our animals' health. They are medical professionals, but nutrition wise, the very little nutrition education that they get is very small, and they don't get parrot nutrition. They might have a day. I was talking to a vet a few years ago, and I was talking about this, and she goes, "Well, what do we get? Like a day of parrot nutrition in vet school? Like we don't know." That was from a vet who
Yeah,
told me.
that's nuts.
I kind of laughed because I was like, when I've been asked to speak at vet schools, it's amazing to me how little vet students know, and how little they're given, and how much education is driven by the pet food manufacturers themselves. So
Yeah,
this is not a conspiracy theory. This is just the system, and
yeah,
unfortunately, it's rampant.
yeah. You mentioned Tops pellets. That is the pellet that we also feed Mia. There's other pellets that she's eaten before. She used to also eat Harrison's pellets, but now she just goes for the Tops pellets, and those are the ones that I've been buying. I know that we talked about diversifying and offering different things and keeping your bird guessing on what they're going to be eating. So if Tops pellets are in your home and it's something that you offer your bird, or you're going to buy it and offer it to your bird, what are your recommendations? Like, don't feed it every single evening with the dry food mix, or like a few times a week, or what
Oh,
would you say?
any of that is fine.
Okay.
When I give dry food at night, I I don't have a plan. So,
You just go with it.
Sirius
There's
has a
going to be
big
Tops
ceramic
pellets
bowl.
today, maybe not.
Like an Italian chef, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But I'm keeping in mind, like, over the course of a week, what did I do yesterday? What did I do the day before? Um, but like, Sirius, like, almost always has a walnut at night. I almost always include a walnut. It's just too beneficial. But what's accompanied with that, because that's going to last him, what, a minute? Like, that's not going to last very long for a black palm. But when it
Yeah.
comes to the other foods, I'll throw some Tops pellets with some freeze dried. I just freeze dried some lion's mane and shiitake mushrooms that I left out in the sun for 30 minutes.
Yeah, I
So
saw you
that
posted
added
that.
benefit. Yeah, mushrooms are another myth that drives me insane. Because we
Yeah, I
literally
wanted to
see
ask you
birds
about
eat
that.
these. Yeah.
We'll
But
get into it.
some of that, some freeze dried fruits and veggies, some dried worms, like freeze dried mealworms, things like that are appropriate for a parrot to be eating, that mimics what they would be eating in the wild. And so I try to diversify and randomly pull some of those things together when certain foods are available. Like right now, we have gooseberries available at the local market. So I'm going to give everybody gooseberries as part of their diet, because I just happen to have those, here, and currants, red currants, which are these bright red little berries.
Yeah,
Love them.
I
So
just
I'm going
bought
to
those.
introduce those. But that's what happens in the wild. Like, there are some trees that bloom every 3 years, and all these animals gorge on it, and then they're done. Then they have to go find something else. But what's beautiful about parrots, in pretty much every ecosystem in which they live, they are opportunistic, which means they're smart, and they can get whatever nutrients they need from a variety of sources. So if we're offering diversity, you know, because I've had people tell me, "Oh, well, your birds must be deficient." I said, "I've never had a bird that came back with blood work that's deficient in any way, none." And I don't feed any kind of processed pellets with a multivitamin in them. I give them whole food, so they're just getting a variety of foods every day, and they're fine because they're exploiting a variety of things just like they would in the wild, and they're getting what they need from that food. So if you're focused on portion control, and you're not just giving your little cockatiel like a plate full of food where they're just going to pick out three things and then walk away, then they will eat the diversity that you need, and they will maximize the benefits. Their digestive system has to be efficient because they need to move stuff through and get it out so that they can stay light enough to fly.
Yeah. And because we're talking about this diverse diet, I just want to mention for anybody who's like listening and new to parrot nutrition and diet for their birds, and I took this also from another one of your articles, raw food takes the form of fruits, vegetables, oils, seeds, and nuts, both dry and soaked and or sprouted, legumes, teas, flowers, and other healthy whole food items. Can you share what are maybe some other whole food healthy items that could also be included? Herbs?
Yeah, herbs are considered veg, so almost all the herbs are fine. And the ones that aren't considered fine, like allium, onion, chives, garlic, those types of things,
Yeah.
can be offered in small amounts that they're not problematic, but you don't need them. Like you don't need them
Yeah.
when you eat so many other things. So if you're ever worried about feeding something, don't.
Okay.
Period. Don't don't do it if you're going to sit up at night and worry about it. And then if your bird gets sick, you're going to blame yourself because you think that food did it, even though it probably didn't. But like,
Yeah.
why beat yourself up over that? So, I incorporate like in my aviary, I'll incorporate garlic within food mixes now and then because they're outside, and garlic is great for like anti-parasites, right? So it can have a lot of benefits. But am I giving them like tons of garlic? No, nobody's getting tons of anything. That's
Yeah.
the problem, is when they get too much of something. And when you look at the very few studies on parrot nutrition, and they're like, oh, this killed birds, so it's toxic. Well, if you look at how much they gave them and force fed them, which I have an ethical problem with in some of these studies, of course it killed them. How could a bird survive if they were force fed a ton of this stuff that's actually more than their body could handle? It's not the food necessarily that caused it. It's the overfeeding of the food.
Yeah.
And so when we look at like what we're feeding, we always want to diversify. And if you don't want to feed your bird garlic, don't feed your bird garlic. But lots of people feed a ground up garlic with certain foods, a few times a year, just for some health benefits, because a lot of foods have lingering benefits. So when it comes to, foods you're worried about, but a paper was just published by a friend of mine, Dr. Evie Vultura, and I think it just came out yesterday. But in the abstract, it says, and this is short, so I promise I won't bore you, but it says that the dietary habits of 71.5% of parrot species classified by the International Union for Conservation of Nature are as at risk of extinction are not well resolved. So we don't know a lot about what parrots do in the wild, right? It takes long-term studies. As a scientist, I can tell you it's expensive to do science. So she said, parrots' consumption of alternative foodstuffs, this is the research that we know. This is the stuff we know. So alternative foodstuffs, meaning like not seeds and nuts, for example, occurred at the following rates at the genus level. So like at the Pyura conure level, at the Ara macaw level, those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
91.2% consume some type of foliage. So that's leaves. 76.9% ate terrestrial invertebrates and fine earthen materials. In terrestrial invertebrates, bugs,
Yeah.
larvae,
The
like mealworms,
mealworms.
right? 76.9% have been seen eating these. Fine earthen materials is clays and soils and things like that where they get minerals from.
Yeah.
74.7% ate wood, consumed the wood, ate it, not just chewing to destroy, but actually consuming some wood, presumably for additional fiber. 44% have been seen eating pure minerals like rock. 34% vertebrates, which means lizards, snakes, those types of things. And
Protein.
9.8% of those have been seen eating animal dung, so animal feces. And I know macaws have been seen eating cow poop because they're eating the seeds out of the undigested seeds out of cow poop. So don't feed your birds cow poop. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just telling you this is what research has shown us.
Yeah.
29.7% have been seen eating sap. Okay, so that's a high sugar.
Yeah.
19.8% have been seen eating some type of roots, presumably grazing birds like cockatiels and things like that.
Yeah.
17.6% eat charcoal because of natural wildfire. So there's burnt wood out there that they're consuming. And charcoal, we know, has some detox, so that may be a
Yeah.
reason. 18.7 epiphytes. So like bromeliads and little orchids and things like that grow up on tree branches, ferns. 16.5% coarse earthen materials, 8.8% algae, 6.6% of parrots eat aquatic invertebrates like snails, for example. So we're there. This is just alternative. So in addition to the foods we already assumed, these are the things that birds are eating in the wild. So we can replicate some of this by offering things we know are safe. Edible culinary mushrooms that you and I would eat are completely safe. They have no effect. There's no toxicity in mushrooms. We'd all be dead if we were eating those types of mushrooms. Don't go
Yeah.
out in the woods and collect mushrooms you don't recognize and give them to your birds. Like that's
Exactly.
that's just dumb, right? But definitely offering culinary mushrooms can bring a whole different taste, texture, set of nutrients to their bodies that we wouldn't have given normally, right? So these are just some of the things that came out in this paper that was just published about what we know, and that's what we've seen. And working with collaborators like Bonnie Zimmerman at the Indonesian Parrot Project, I told her one time we were talking and I said, oh yeah, somebody just flipped out on me on Facebook because I feed my bird mealworms. She goes, what's wrong with that? And I said, well, they don't think parrots should eat bugs. She goes, I literally watch cockatoos pull larvae out of tree bark and eat them. Like we literally watch them do that. Of course they do. Why wouldn't they? They need to exploit any type of food. And that means they're eating tree bark. That means they're eating some wood. They're
Cow
eating all
poop.
these different types of stuff. Yes.
Lizards.
Yes. So does that mean we should be feeding them all of these things in our homes? No, because it's really hard to know what sources, right? You shouldn't buy aquarium snails and give them to your bird. Like you don't know
Exactly.
what they have. So don't do that. But using some common sense and doing a little bit of research and saying like, well, there's nothing wrong with lion's mane mushroom. As a matter of fact, there's huge health benefits to the nervous system, to all kinds of body systems with lion's mane, and it makes its own vitamin D when you expose it to sun. So if you have birds that can't go outside and get their own sunlight, here's another way to offer them some vitamin D. And so like just keeping some of these things in mind, it's like we need to think and expand what we can offer birds. And Dr. Becker says it best. She's like, we need to stop fearing food. Like, stop fearing food. All of these whole foods, these fresh foods that we can offer, we know the nutrients. They've been studied. We know what's in them. And we can pass those benefits onto our birds by giving them a diverse diet and keep it. You said mentally earlier, physiology is 50%. This is the other 50%. If we're not keeping our birds mentally engaged,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to be content in their environment. And that leads to
Yeah.
behavior problems.
Exactly. Exactly. I think that it's so important to keep them mentally stimulated. And that doesn't mean just, making sure that they have toys. It
Yes.
means, enrichment in so many different forms, including food and all of these different activities and keeping them guessing and this diverse diet. And, there's just so many ways for us to do that for our birds, but we have to educate ourselves to know how to provide those opportunities
Yes.
and those types of things for our birds to keep them happy. Let's talk a little bit about misconceptions because Well, first of all, I wanted to touch on some of those things that you mentioned in this article. Like, just because, these wild parrots are eating lizards, like you mentioned, or soil and clay and cow poop and all these different things, doesn't mean go out and, bring those things into your home. But whatever we can mimic from the wild, we should whenever we can. But we have to be really mindful. Like, don't just go buy soil and bring it home. You need to, like, the soil that they're eating in the wild, like, it's not full of pesticides and chemicals and all these different things. And birds are also smart. Like, they know what's good for them and what they need and what would kill them, I'm pretty sure.
Um, I would say partially. I think there's
Partially.
some things that they like if they've evolved, like we have a mix called Go Wild that I bring in the specific items that the birds are consuming in Indonesia, for example.
In the
Not,
wild.
yeah, in the wild. And they're sustainably harvesting them because these are the animals they introduce to birds that have been smuggled that they are using to reintroduce them into the wild. So these are the actual wild foods. And when we give this to birds who have never seen them before, who have been raised in managed situations, okay, and they're in
Hmm.
someone's homes, they pick those nuts out like they recognize them in a heartbeat. And that tells us that there's coevolution involved. And basically, that means that the plant has evolved alongside the animals that eat it because the plant needs this animal to take this nut and carry it someplace so that it gets planted somewhere because the plant can't move, right?
Yeah.
So the UV light is reflecting off of these items, and the birds are evolved, they're adapted to recognize that as food, which may not happen if you put a red bell pepper in their cage because they've never seen that before, right? So sometimes it's a matter of breaking it open and letting them go for the pepper seeds because they see the seeds as food. That's why they
Yeah.
go for peppers. So those are the types of things we have to keep in mind. It's the biology, right? It's biology, biology, biology. You have to know how these animals evolved, how they've adapted to live in their environments, and then bring these foods together so that they can, exploit them, use them for their benefit. Um, but yeah, you definitely don't want to go out and just like buy soil because that you don't know what's in it. But there are things that have been formulated for birds that can mimic their ancestral diet, what they've evolved to eat. And that's like walnuts. They don't have English walnuts in the wild, right? South
Yeah.
American birds don't see an English walnut, but that can replace the healthy fats, the proteins, the minerals that they would get from other types of nuts that they eat. There are foods that they do eat in the wild, like papayas and mangoes. Like they can consume those with the seeds and exploit those. But you definitely have to consider like what's their natural biology? What are they doing? What are they built for? And then how can we mimic that?
Yeah, absolutely. I always say this, that we want to, like, do everything as close to nature intended and do what's biologically appropriate and try to mimic the wild. And I think that what you do is so incredibly important, and like focusing on the biology, the science, like what are we actually seeing in the wild instead of what the pet store tells us, because they're just trying to sell everything that's on their shelves, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be good for our birds. You also mentioned walnuts a lot. Do you recommend like a walnut every day,
A
like over
walnut a
all other
day,
nuts?
a walnut a day keeps the veterinarian away. Yeah, I
Even for
think
small birds like a budgie, a whole walnut?
so. I think that you can crack a walnut in half
Okay.
and let them extract some of the nut from the shell themselves. Let them work at it.
Oh,
Is a budgie going to eat half a walnut? No, it's bigger than, I mean, it weighs more than the budgie does. So giving them that as an enrichment, as a foraging opportunity is a lot of fun and it gives them a lot of benefit.
yeah.
Um,
Mia loves
walnut, well,
walnuts.
yeah, I mean, according to, the USDA, walnuts are in the top 20 as far as like what can provide omega-3 fatty acids. So that's a
Hmm.
huge benefit. And those are just rare in the diet. And they're very fragile if they're extracted from the diet as an oil. So they don't, I mean, if you look at the oil the wrong way. It starts to denature and fall apart. Like it just doesn't survive very well outside of the food. But a walnut a day for a large bird has a huge amount of benefit. Huge amount of benefit. And then, Brazil nuts and pecans, filberts like hazelnuts, pine nuts. Those are all really beneficial. Almonds don't have omega-3 fatty acids. It doesn't mean that they're not beneficial, but you definitely don't want to be feeding tons of walnuts, because it just doesn't, it's not going to have, you're not going to get what you really want, which is those omega-3s out of the walnuts, for
Yeah.
example. And smaller birds, flaxseed, chia seed, hemp seed, things like that are
Sunflower seeds. I know that
sorry.
those are really healthy, but
So
not when it's the entire diet.
yes, exactly. Sunflower seeds are a health food. And if you've been told differently, you've been told wrong. But you should not feed, I mean, a cockatiel, a few sunflower seeds a day is more than enough to get all the benefits. I mean, lots of vitamin E, lots of healthy fat. They're not rich in omega-3 fatty acids, but they definitely have other components that are very beneficial. So a few sunflower seeds a day goes a long way.
Yeah. And I've seen you talk about fats a lot in your articles as well, and how essential
The
fatty
F word.
acids are referred to as good fats, and avian requirements are substantial, though all fats serve a vital purpose in the diet. They are critical for normal reproduction, reproduction, feather production, and a healthy immune system. And I think that with fats, even with our own diets, they're like, as humans, people are so scared of fats
Yeah,
because it's going to make you fat, but fats are essential for us and for our parrots. And it's like we said, everything in moderation, nothing too much, nothing just like full of nuts. You don't want to feed only nuts or only seeds, because
right.
then it's going to be too much. So how much is too little or too much of fats, and what is enough? And other than the seeds and the nuts, do you recommend any other sources of fat? I know you've talked about oils in the articles too.
Mhm. Yeah, oils are usually a supplement if needed. If there's some kind of health
Okay.
issue where um, they really need to reduce inflammation, for example, an omega-3 essential fatty acid oil could be a quick way to deliver that if they're not consuming, some of the other foods. But if you want to reduce inflammation, you give them living food like soaked and sprouted items, fruit and veg. Um, and um, there is no magic number amount for fats, because not only does each species have their own individual needs, but each individual bird can have their own individual needs based on
Yeah,
the environment they live in, right? So there's
100%.
no magic number, but what you don't want to do is eliminate fat from the diet because your vet said they're fat. Sugar is converted to fat in the liver, which causes fatty liver disease through a process called lipogenesis. So if you really want to get rid of fat in your bird's liver, for example, you eliminate the sugar, which comes in the form of the sucrose that's added to pellets diets, grain-based pellets. Those are the things that can wreak havoc over time. But giving your bird some seeds, a couple nuts a day, things like that, that's not going to make your bird fat. You also have to consider exercise, and you have to keep the bird moving. And that does not mean that they have to fly 14 miles a day. That means that you need them working, you need them moving as any way you can. Hang stuff from the center of the cage so they have to hang upside down to get to it. Hang stuff, hang skewers from the ceiling on plastic chains, and let your bird try to get to those foods and hang from them. Like, do whatever you can to get your bird active and moving as much as possible. You know what your bird wants, make them work to get it. That is not cruel. That is the healthiest thing you could do, is getting your birds to move. So, as far as, fat quantities, they're not getting a ton of fat with fresh food because the seeds and stuff that you're sprouting are converting those fats into other things to help plant growth. So microgreens, soaked and sprouted items, fruit and veg, low in fat. Um, And then at night, some seeds, some nuts, some dried veg, stuff like that. Just that's where they're going to get their beneficial fats from. And
You
that,
also
if you follow those portion sizes we talked about earlier, you'll be fine.
Yeah, you also talked about soaking nuts, and I know that that makes them more digestible. How long do you soak the nuts for?
Just overnight.
Okay.
The nuts should be out of the shell. I rinse them off in just cool water, cool, clean water. I soak
Okay.
them. Just in cool, clean water overnight. I wake up, rinse them. You can feed them right then and there as part of the diet. And
Nice.
that's you can. And there's lots of information online about activating nuts, which is soaking them to kind of jumpstart their conversion process, because nuts are seeds. They're basically, a package of nutrients that are there to jumpstart growth so that that can turn into a tree someday, right? So getting them to activate makes them more digestible, sometimes by like 200%. And then, starts to convert some of the components, the nutrient components in there to other things. So just overnight is plenty to give them something additional to the diet that they wouldn't normally have.
Awesome. And there was something else that you wrote that I wanted to touch on because I thought that it was really interesting that with fats, we need to also not be afraid of them because deficiencies of these fats can lead to failure to weight gain, degeneration of the liver and kidneys, behavioral disturbances, inability of wounds to heal sufficiently, infertility, poor or abnormal feather development, and dry, sealy skin. So when they don't have enough of these omega-3s and omega-6s, then that can cause problems. If they have too much of them, that can also cause problems. And I think that that's why it's so important to talk about how they need to have a diversity, but also in moderation.
Yes, absolutely.
Since we're talking about fats, I wanted to talk about two other types of fats. One is coconuts and coconut oil. I know that you're a fan of them, and coconut oil and the MCTs are just super beneficial. So
Mhm.
tell us about coconut oil and feeding it to our parrots. How much? How often? I know that it's also great for toucans or even for our birds to moisturize their beaks and their feet.
Yeah. So coconut oil, and there's just so much research on this because it's used so widely
Yeah.
across the globe. Um, Topically, great for um, bare surfaces, which means not on the feathers, right?
Hmm.
No oils on the feathers. Let the birds take care of that. That's what they're there for. But a little bit on the beak can help seal and heal any kind of microabrasions and things like that. And then if they have dry feet, you can also put it topically. It's great for people to put on their skin and
Yeah.
things like that too.
And it should be
Um,
raw, pure,
yeah,
cold
extra
pressed,
virgin, yeah, cold
extra
pressed.
virgin. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you want to give your birds fresh coconut, go for it. They literally are burrowing into coconuts. You should see some of the images we have of cockatoos in Indonesia who are filthy, just completely filthy because they stick their heads into these coconuts and they're eating them from the inside out. Just filthy birds. Um,
I might have been a
but
cockatoo in my past life. I
yes,
love coconut.
yeah, me too. Coconuts, I'm well, and the fiber and everything. There's just so many benefits to it. Um, the oil, you need so little, and whether you're a person taking coconut oil or not, you just don't need that much to see benefits from it. So a few drops twice a week for most birds is more than enough. You can add it to some of their fresh food, for example, and coconut oil is actually antimicrobial, so it can keep fresh food, good longer, fresher longer.
It's
But
antifungal and antiviral too.
antifungal,
It's like anti
yeah,
everything.
yeah. I mean, you can literally use it as a deodorizer, like to clean things, to keep stuff from growing. I've tested it in the lab on in bacterial plates, and it really does work. So
Amazing.
there are benefits to that. I think in Western culture in particular, we think if a little is good, a lot must be better.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I think that we were like, oh, well, walnuts are healthy, so I'm going to give you 7, right?
Yeah.
Or coconut oil is great, so I'm going to give it every day and I'm going to put a tablespoon on your food. Like anything can become unhealthy if it's offered
Yeah.
in large quantities. So a little bit, and if your bird doesn't take it, by a spoon, just a few drops on a spoonful, for example, a couple times a week, you can always mix it in with their sprouts one day. I mean, they're going to ingest some as they manipulate the sprouts and break them and chew them up. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's definitely a lot of benefits to those. You can get liquid MCT oil, which is extracted from coconut oil, especially C8, which carbonate C8 is one that's commonly used because that seems to have a lot of benefits with digestion. But when I added coconut oil to my diet, I started dropping weight immediately. And if you take too much, you can actually drop too much weight because it does help your metabolism. It supports a healthy metabolism. And what's really beautiful about it, my mom passed away from pancreatic cancer. So
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I'm always keeping in mind like how to keep the pancreas healthy. You don't need any insulin because it's not sugar. So this is a steady form of energy that can be burned throughout the day steadily without no sugar rush or high, right? From this fat.
Hmm.
It's steadily burned by your body, by the cells. And then your pancreas doesn't have to be taxed by secreting insulin for this because there's no sugar to control. So it's really beneficial for a lot of reasons. But like I said, they don't need a lot, but it can be really beneficial. It's great for skin by consuming it. It's great for digestion. It's great for balancing the nervous system and nerve cells, things like that. So it just has a lot of benefits, but you just don't need that much.
Yeah. Coconuts. We're coconuts for coconuts.
Yeah, they're so
Um,
beneficial. So beneficial.
yeah. And they also taste delicious, so that's a bonus.
Yeah.
The other fat that I wanted to talk about, and I know there's a lot of mixed information about this online, and I actually got a question about this, is peanuts. Are peanuts okay for birds? I keep reading mixed suggestions, but the nut not in the shell. And so I don't think that peanuts should be fed to birds, but I'll let you
I agree. Yeah,
explain
no,
that.
there's no room for peanuts in the diet. There is nothing necessary. I don't care because I know people are going to come for me in the comments with some of this stuff. And if you come for me in the comments, you didn't listen to this whole thing because we've addressed all of this stuff. So, listen to the whole thing. But people are going to come for me in the comments because they'll be like, "Well, I fed peanuts for 25 years to my birds and
And they
they're
were
just fine."
fine.
And that's great. That's wonderful. Um, but peanuts have a poor fatty acid profile. There's lots of peanuts are not a nut, first of all. They're a legume. They're grown in the ground. And really the benefits come from tree nuts, not peanuts. So walnuts, pecans, filberts, the ones I mentioned earlier, much
Yeah.
better fatty acid profiles. Chia, hemp, flaxseed, much better fatty acid profiles. But peanuts, with they're high in omega 6s, which increases inflammation, that can have long-term effects. Um, and they're also prone to fungal aspergillus,
The alpha toxins.
yeah, which then produce aflatoxins. And mycotoxins are not inactivated by heat. So people will say, oh, well, they're roasted to get rid of all the fungus. Well, there's lots of types of molds out there who spread their spores through natural fire. So their spores are spread through natural wildfires because wildfires are natural, they're naturally occurring, and that's how some of these organisms reproduce by spreading through billowing smoke. They spread their fire. So and this goes for dog and cat food too. Kibble, there's a lot of recalls in kibble because these mycotoxins are not inactivated by heat. So, you know,
Yeah.
cooking does not necessarily make everything better. It actually does some damage. So, and peanuts are one of those. There's just no reason to feed peanuts. There's so many other things.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. We're on the same page because I'm always like, no, peanuts, you don't need to feed peanuts. Like like we've talked about, like there's so many foods. Like there are hundreds of other foods that you can feed your birds. And I want to actually go back a little bit to debunking some myths. You talked about mushrooms, and I know like it is on the list of things that are toxic for birds. So,
Sometimes. Yeah,
right.
sometimes it is.
And in, like you mentioned, in small amounts, they can be incredibly beneficial and they can provide vitamin D. What are some other like myths that you see out there that you're like, that is not true, or in small amounts, it's not toxic?
So like I said earlier with garlic, a little bit of garlic goes a long way. That's a myth I see all the time. Um, and if you're, like I said, if you're uncomfortable feeding it or you're questioning it all, just don't do it. Your bird doesn't have to have that. We often offer it, like I said earlier, because to outside birds, it gives them an added benefit. But garlic I see often as a myth. Um,
What about
seed,
avocados?
well, so seed in general, let me say this first and then we'll visit avocados because
Okay.
that's a discussion. But seed in general, we hear people saying all the time, oh, seed is just garbage food. It has no calorie, it has no benefit, it has no nutrients, it's just a waste. That is so untrue. Seed has to have nutritional benefits or the plant would not be able to grow from this little tiny seed. So there is always benefits to offering seed, especially because it's a biologically appropriate food that
Yeah.
birds have been, they're built to consume. But once again, like you said, diversify. Don't give too much of any one thing. A cockatiel with, a teaspoon of seed, that's more than enough. That's plenty. You don't need a ton of food. Now, that being said, avocados. Okay. Birds birds eat avocados in the wild and they're
Yes.
not falling out of the trees dying all over the place. Okay.
Yeah.
I have relatives that live in Southern California. They've seen the parrots, the wild parrots, they're eating avocados. Here's the problem. Here's why you cannot feed avocados. And I'm going to say it again because someone's going to put in the comments that I said avocados are okay. Do not feed your bird avocados. I just said it. Okay. Don't feed them. They don't need it. And it's sad because avocado is so incredibly nutritious that it would be a great food, but we can't feed parrots avocados. And the reason is there is a toxin called persin, and persin is in the flesh, the seed, and the skin of the avocado when it's unripe. Okay. In order to increase the shelf life, and that's the plant's defense of don't eat my avocado because it's not ready yet, right? Because they want birds to carry their avocados somewhere else so that pit can grow into a tree.
Yeah.
The reason that there's still a risk of avocado toxicity at the grocery store is because they are plucked from the tree before they can ripen on the branch. And if they ripen on the branch, they're generally safe for animals to eat. And then, but because we pluck them from the branch before they're ripe, they still have the toxin in the flesh, or they're at risk for having the toxin in the flesh so that they have a shelf life. Otherwise, all the avocados would be rotten before they got to the grocery store. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's mainly because of that. I've had people ask me, well, I grow avocados. Can I just feed ripe avocados off my tree to my birds? My answer for that is don't feed avocados. There's lots of other things to feed. However, zoos have been feeding other species of birds avocados for decades with no problems, but parrots seem to have a sensitivity to it. So we have fed avocado to toucans and we fed avocado to tanagers and all kinds of little birds. We've never lost a bird to avocado toxicity, but we would never feed it to a parrot. It's just too risky. You don't know if the toxin's there. Have people had birds die from avocado toxicity? Yes. Have people had birds that ate avocados with no effect? Absolutely. We don't have any way of knowing what level the flesh of the avocado has when it comes to the toxin, so you just don't feed it. Do not feed avocado to parrots. There's just no reason for it.
Okay. Perfect. Don't feed avocados. A tiny bit of mushrooms and a tiny bit of garlic. Myths
Yeah,
debunked.
yeah, yeah. And
um,
mushrooms, I mean, mushrooms are completely fine if you're buying them as food. If they're food mushrooms that you're buying, they're fine. Like, I can give my birds a chunk of lion's mane and a few slices of shiitake mushrooms. They don't need any more than that, and they get the benefit from it. So there's just no reason to be afraid of mushrooms that are specifically, for food.
yeah. Okay. And I have a couple more questions, but before we start to wrap things up, let everybody know how they can find you on social media and your website and anywhere else they can find you for more information.
Okay, so after working on this for 20 some years, we finally started our own food line last year. I didn't want another job, but it became necessary. And it's been really, really positive to have a site that's just whole food. All 100%, everything we have is just whole food, nothing's processed. And you can get pretty much everything outside of your fresh fruits and vegetables, in bundles. We've made it as easy as we can. And the reason we started it is a portion of every sale helps fund our research at the Animal Nutrition Lab, as well as the Avian Preservation and Education Conservancy, which is a nonprofit that I'm on the board of that specifically focuses on conservation of birds in the wild, including breeding the Florida grasshopper sparrow that's been re-released and increasing those numbers. The red siskin, which is a little finch from Colombia that's endangered, getting those out of smuggled situations and breeding them. They bred their 150th chick last year, so lots of success. But that helps fund all of our scientific endeavors. So we greatly appreciate it. Science is so expensive to do. But you
Yeah.
can find me on that site, biobirdblends.com. And there's a link for the store up at the top if you wanna check out what we have there. You can also check out my Facebook group, which is Avian Raw Whole Food Nutrition. We're over 21,000 members. And those are all people who had to answer questions. So they're actual accounts, they're real people. And we just talk about whole food there and lots of examples, and people share some of the things that work for them. So you can search that group and find all kinds of information. I have a membership group called Team Thrive, which has my Avian Nutrition 101 and 102 courses that are part of the membership. And you can join Team Thrive to benefit from those courses and that's that type of thing. But those are the main ways that you can find me. Instagram is drjasoncrean.com, Dr. Jason Crean, all one word. And we also have a page for biodiversity bird blends too on Instagram. So, and TikTok, which
Awesome.
I need to get better at TikTok.
I know there's so many social media platforms, it's hard to keep up.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
posting content across all of them.
Yes, I don't know how you do it. I have a lot of
I,
respect for what you do. It's hard. It's hard work.
yeah, it's very time consuming. All right, let's talk a little bit about the wild and science and what you've observed in the wild. I want to know, like, what has been the most interesting discovery that you've made when it comes to like biology and birds, or like what's the most interesting thing that you've come across in wild parrots?
Um, I think their intelligence and how that plays a role in how I guess I kind of have answered this question a little bit throughout what we've talked about today, but how they can exploit so many things um, based on the day. Like, oh, I can't go in that tree today because there's monkeys there. So what am I going to do for food? I got to go someplace else. I got to find other things, right? And just their ability to adapt to changing situations. I think we don't give our birds enough credit for their ability to adapt, and adapt to new situations quickly. I mean, granted, African greys, you have to put the toy in the room with them before you can put it in the cage for weeks so that they don't flip out, right? But I think we don't give our birds enough credit as far as how quickly they can adapt to different situations. And that's really something when you're looking at birds in the wild and seeing um, well, just that list I shared with you earlier about the
Yeah.
huge number of different things that they can exploit. I mean, they just figure out what to eat and how to survive. Um, so a lot of people we treat our birds like they're these fragile little creatures that will just die in a second, but they're resilient,
Yeah.
outside of dangerous fumes in the house, like they're pretty resilient animals. And they would have to be if they're going to survive in the wild. So just the parrot's ability, regardless of the ecosystem in which they live, their ability to adapt, um, to changing situations is really something.
And when you are observing parrots and doing studies and trying to figure them out, what do these studies look like? Like, are you going into the Amazon with like binoculars and like observing them for hours? Or like, what do these studies like look like?
I'm not doing that myself. I have collaborators that have.
Yeah.
Um, Dr. Caroline of Stethion in particular is my closest collaborator. She's my bestie. But she has well, and some of her studies are really interesting, and it was what she did her PhD work on. But the um, finding ways. So her doctorate is actually in entomology, so bugs, but she is a bird lover. She has birds at home, lots of parrots, has bred finches and all kinds of different birds, in her home. And she wanted to do something on how do I use what I'm doing to help preserve and conserve birds in the wild. So Africanized honeybees, for example, are one that will take over bird nest cavities. And Africanized honeybees are really aggressive. So if they're taking over a nest cavity, they're killing, if there are birds in there, they're killing them. And otherwise, the birds won't use that. So they've just lost a nest, right? And nest cavities are not easy to come by. They often have to be a certain size, like a certain width, which means an older tree. And that's why deforestation can be so devastating for certain species, because if you take
Yeah.
away old growth forests, those animals aren't going to be around for 100 or 200 years waiting for the tree to get big enough to nest in, right?
Yeah.
So how do we get these Africanized honeybees that have taken over these nest hollows out and the birds so that the birds can nest in them again? And so she created a way where she's using a bird safe pesticide to get the bees out of those nest cavities. And then they're mounting boxes, honey boxes, so that the bees have a place to go. So they call it a push pull. We're pushing the bees out of the nest and we're pulling them to the bee boxes, and then training the people, native people who are there, not to poach the parrots and try to sell the chicks on the black market, but to harvest honey and sell that as their income.
The people in the
So
Amazon?
people wherever she is, so she's
Okay.
been to Brazil, Guatemala, South Africa, so a variety of these places,
Yeah.
so that these people can see how to abate these bees so that they're not impacting negatively these parrots and breeding, and then pulling them to a place where they can still exist, but the people can then harvest the honey and use that as their income. So
Wow.
that's
That's
one
amazing.
one way, and then working with people like Bonnie Zimmerman at Indonesian Parrot Project, and we learn so much from the work that the people there are doing, and she has people that are native to those areas who are doing the conservation work, and getting these birds that have been illegally smuggled back to the wild, and showing them how to be birds again, and making sure
Yeah.
that they're consuming foods and they're eating on their own so that they can be re-released. Those are the types of things um, that researchers are doing. And then when you look at nutrition studies, sometimes they can be pretty narrow. Like they look at just a handful of this species, and they look at their crops for that point in time, but they're not getting a long-term. It's really hard to get a long-term look at what a species is eating daily year round, for example. So it's hard. There's just not a lot of research out there because who's going to fund bird food research, right? Bird
Yeah.
nutrition research. Like most of the research that's out there is generated by pet food manufacturers that want to sell some kind of product, but it's not pure research. There's
Yeah,
lacking.
absolutely. Thank
We
you
need
for sharing.
more. Mhm.
Amazing. I had another question, and that was, how do environmental factors such as temperature and humidity impact a parrot's nutritional needs and dietary preferences that maybe you've seen in some studies or in the wild?
Oh, that's
Is
a
that a
giant,
loaded question?
yeah. Um,
Does temperature and humidity impact their dietary preferences and
it
their
can.
nutritional
Yeah.
needs?
Yeah, it
Okay.
can. When we have birds, like, so I'm in Florida, so we keep our birds outside year round. We see uh, their their food consumption goes up when it gets cooler out. So we'll have nights in, the 40 degree Fahrenheit, for example, range, this time of year. And I see like they eat, but like the bowls are clean. Like they consume everything to the point where I have to add supplemental food. So when it gets colder, in order to keep their body temperatures functioning and maintain homeostasis in their body, they need
More
extra food,
food.
it seems. Yeah. So they do tend to eat more. Um, in the home, it's less of an issue if it's cold in your home. It's more about drafts that are the problem. So like you can sleep in a cold room as a person, as a human being, right? You can sleep in a cold room, under the covers and be comfortable. And actually, it's better for us if we sleep at cooler temperatures for our body to relax. But
Yeah.
when it comes to birds, it's the draft. So if you sleep next to an open window, you'll wake up and you're all stuffy and everything because you didn't adjust to the draft, the cool breeze coming in through the window, right? It's the
Yeah.
same with birds, and that can impact them a lot. So it's the drafts more than the temperature, and humidity is always important. Nutrition's not going to really do anything to help with low humidity. So giving your bird an opportunity to bathe regularly, um, having a warm air humidifier that you keep clean. You got to make sure you're keeping that
Hmm.
humidifier clean. Um, those types of things are just really beneficial for the environment. So you've got nutrition that provides the bird with the ability to adapt to a lot of situations, and then you've got environmental factors that you have to keep in mind as well, and that's humidity and temperature, light. For example, making sure that having the TV on late at night is not dark sleep. They need dark sleep. So,
Yeah.
you have to make
Yeah.
sure that they are getting dark sleep, for and usually like at least 10 hours for most birds, should have some kind of dark sleep.
Okay. Awesome. All right. We'll talk about one more thing and then we'll wrap things up. We
Sure.
talked about teas a lot earlier, and I know you have a lot of written material about teas. You talk about how important and incredibly beneficial they are. So tell us really quickly about why avian teas should be a part of their diet and how we can offer these teas. Like, we don't want to use boiling water. What, like, how hot should the water be, and things like that.
Teas are great because there's so many different ways to offer them. Um,
And so many
you
different
can cold
kinds.
Yes, there's lots of different kinds. You can cold brew or hot brew, but you should never use boiling water because boiling water will destroy the nutrients in tea. So a lot of people will bring the water to a boil and then they let it cool down a bit before they will add it to their tea, and that's fine. Don't give your bird hot water. It
Yeah.
should be cold no matter
Don't
what.
do that.
But my favorite way is cold brewing. So I will take the dry tea, I will add it to a pitcher of filtered water, and then I will leave it out on the counter or in the refrigerator, either way, overnight, and let it slow brew. Then I strain off the stuff that I brewed and I add it to their chop or their sprouts. I just mix all that wet flour leaf stuff in with that because then they can consume it. And then I can offer that tea. I keep it in the refrigerator because tea is a food. So you have to keep it refrigerated when you're not offering it. It won't go bad, obviously, over the course of the day, but giving them the tea in place of their water for part of the day is what I recommend. I typically give it to them with fresh food. There are tons of different types of teas. Do not purchase a tea, and I can't say this enough, and I'm not saying it in order to sell tea because this has been an issue I see. People think if you just throw a bunch of pretty stuff into a bag and you put a bird on the label, okay, here it is, a bird tea, now use this. There are things that birds should not have too much of.
Yeah.
And there are some teas, they need to be formulated by somebody that knows what they're doing. I've been doing it for over 15 years as far as formulating teas for birds specifically, based on my research, based on my conversations with my professional colleagues over time, and then fine tuning things as we administer this to the different species of birds and other animals. Because in European zoos, for example, they've been offering tea to rhinoceros and lemurs and all these different species for decades because it has some kind of benefit. So get bird tea that's specifically formulated by someone that knows what they're doing, because otherwise it's just a bunch of pretty stuff in a bag and you don't really know what you're getting. You should never buy tea in tea bags because it's ground up. You don't know what's really in there. There has been some analysis of some of these teas where they're like, well, they're claiming that this is green tea, but there's actually no green tea in this, and you just think it's green tea and it's flavored to,
Yeah.
you don't know what you're getting unless you see the leaves and the flowers and everything itself. So you should be able to see all the ingredients in their whole form. And then use a stainless steel steeper if you're not doing cold brewing. So because that can be easily washed and reused over and over and over again. But when it comes to the teas, the only ones that have caffeine are from the camellia plant. And that's what we stereotypically think of as tea. Camellia tea is green tea, black tea, white tea, and oolong tea.
Yeah.
And green tea and black tea have a huge number of benefits. You can do scientific, like look at a scientific literature review. There are tons of studies that show all the wonderful things that black and green tea do. They don't harm animal physiology whatsoever, so they're always safe. But they do, that plant has caffeine naturally. And
That was going to be my next question about the caffeine.
Let's face it, our birds don't need to be stimulated any more than they already are. So they don't need a stimulant. So you should buy them decaffeinated organically. They have to be organically decaffeinated. Otherwise, they're adding chemicals to the tea in order to extract the caffeine. And you don't need to add chemicals to get rid of a chemical. So like organically decaffeinated means they only use carbon dioxide and water to get the caffeine to filter out. And then those tea leaves are just fine. And some people say, oh, but there's still caffeine left over. 1 to 5% in the leaf. And then you're diluting it, so it is negligible. That tiny bit of caffeine is left, negligible. It does not affect the birds, and I know because I've been offering my birds decaf and green tea for 20 years. None of them have ever had any effects from caffeine whatsoever. But the other things that we can offer are, and I find blending is critically important. Blending gives you the benefits and helps them work in concert. So for example, we never just offer green tea. We always offer green tea with some other things. Now, green tea is great for the immune system, so I would be adding things like rose and rose hips and hibiscus, all high in vitamin C, so great for the immune system. Jasmine flowers, they call them dragon pearls, but they're the white flowers. We incorporate those. Herbs like rosemary and things like that, you can when they're dried, can be brewed as part of the tea. But we have tea formulations for the immune system. We have teas for pluckers, particularly, skin and feather teas. We have a calming tea. We have a tea that supports detox in the liver that has milk thistle, which is, universally used by veterinarians everywhere for liver health, because it not only helps keep the liver healthy, but it also can regenerate damaged liver tissue to an extent, which is, there's not much else that can do that. We have a flower forage and a green forage that you can actually offer dry, or you can brew it, or you can mix it in with fresh food. There's like lots of different ways to do that, but then you're increasing the diversity in the diet with all of these different things. And the flowers and the leaves, they all have these different benefits, right? They have all of
Yeah.
these bioactive components that have been evaluated by scientific institutions like the UCLA Cancer Center, um, the Tufts University Center on Aging, and all these different journals like the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition. They've all evaluated these different types of tea components and what makes them beneficial. And it's the biochemical compounds that are found in these teas. So we can use this science through water, through getting birds to drink to give them something benefit. But what's beautiful is birds are drinking tea in the wild. They're not drinking purified water. There is no Brita filter hanging from the trees
That's
in the
true.
Amazon. They're drinking from these rain catches that have all kinds of plant components that are
Yeah.
leaching all day with the hot sun. They're leaching all this stuff into the wild. So these birds are already consuming tannins and other things through their wild diets, through their wild foraging. And we can replicate that by giving them tea.
Yeah. That's amazing. And Biodiversity Bird Blends sells a bunch of these different teas that you're talking about.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. And
Well,
I wanted to very quickly talk about also like the tea bags because you were talking about how, you can't see what's inside of the tea bags, but even the tea bags alone, like there's been studies that they're leaching microplastics and like
yes.
they're soaked in some types of chemicals as well. So then that's going into the water and your bird would be drinking that as well. So yeah, also loose leaf, organic and decaf. Sometimes you see on like social media and people think it's so cute or so funny that their birds are getting into their black tea or into their coffee with dairy and sugar. And sometimes people don't understand like how dangerous caffeine can be for parrots and what it can do to their bodies. And I think like it can make their, hearts overstimulate and things like that. So caffeine can be very dangerous for our birds, especially if they consume too much of it.
Yeah, and the tea bags, when you think about it, it makes sense because the tea bags have to survive. They have to stay intact in really, really hot water, right? So those tea bags are often treated so that they can survive. And yes, they're microplastics. And honestly, we can't escape from the toxins in our environment. Like we can
Yeah.
limit how much we take, but really we need to focus on supporting detox, and that's where tea can really come in handy and help our livers work the way that they're supposed to and get this stuff out of our bodies as efficiently as possible.
And the biodiversity bird blends, the teas, do you ship all over the world?
So right now we ship within the United States, and we have a distributor in Canada that takes care of
The
Canadian
parrot
residents.
shop.
Yes, yes, we're in hotel, right? Parrot shop and hotel. I think that's the in Canada. But we also have a distributor in Japan, so we're looking at trying to diversify this so that we can get stuff all over. Countries have different shipping regulations. I get
Yeah.
people contacting me from Australia constantly who
Yeah.
want to do this, and Australia has some of the most rigid import-export laws. So, they're afraid that some of this stuff could, proliferate in their environment, and I totally understand that. So, there's got to be ways that we can get this more widespread. But,
Yeah.
yeah, in Europe,
What about polys?
polys, I helped formulate those
Oh,
teas for
okay.
polys. So that would be a source in Europe that you could
Okay.
use. Um,
Perfect.
yeah.
Great. And last thing, when it comes to teas, I saw that you also talked about like if your bird is suspicious, there's other ways that you can offer it. Like if you're cooking them some rice or you're cooking something for them, you could cook it in the tea.
Yeah, and I don't recommend cooking at all, but you can soak things in tea that
Okay.
would then, yeah, because years ago, when I wrote some of those articles, we were trying to get people to transition from by getting tea into the diet in some way. So if they
Right.
were using rice or pasta, like they could soak it,
Or like
use that to
baking
soak it up.
muffins or the birdie
Yeah,
bread.
right. So but if you're still doing that, you want to try and get away from any kind of cooked foods. And you can offer the tea, but you can also, soak the sprouts in tea for a half hour and then
Okay.
offer those. So there's different ways that you could get the teas in there, but the best is brewing and drinking. That hands down, that's the best way to get tea into the diet.
And last question, and then we'll say our goodbye.
Yep.
If I offer like this cold brew tea to Mia and she decides to take a bath in it, is that
Yeah,
okay?
absolutely.
Okay.
Some of these teas you can actually put into a spray bottle, like the Plumage Perfection tea that I formulated. You can spray it right on their skin because calendula is great topically as well. You can actually buy
Okay.
over-the-counter gels and creams now that are calendula based that are antibiotic. So you can definitely spray those. Some of the teas are going to stain your bird though. So like if you're brewing hibiscus tea, which is usually like red, probably don't want to spray that on your cockatoo. Might not be a good
Yeah.
idea. Some of the other things, yeah, it's totally fine. It may stain their feathers, but it's not gonna hurt them in any way. But if they want to take a bath in their tea, there's probably, like Laura Joseph always says, there's always a reason for behavior. So if they're bathing
Right.
in it, they're probably doing that for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jason, for joining me today. It was so awesome to talk to you, and you've just been a wealth of knowledge. We know so much more now about the avian diet and nutrition and what our birds should be eating.
Fingers crossed that people will start to diversify things and give their birds a chance to try a lot of new things.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't
I've
give up after one or two times. You gotta be persistent and give your bird some credit. Let them have some time to get accustomed to new foods.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I feel like a lot of people always leave me comments or slide into my DMs that, I tried once and they won't eat it or they're being
Yeah,
really picky. And it's just like, it's not something that happens overnight. They might not like it the first time. They might not like it the second time. It could take a few weeks. It could take a few months, but you
absolutely.
will get there.
Yep, you will. You're
Awesome.
smarter than your bird. Trust me
Yeah.
on that.
Thanks for tuning in to the Parrot Podcast. I'm your host, Sandra from Poodles and Parrots. Mia has joined me. She's being a little bit shy because she woke up from her nap after she dried off from her bath and finished preening. And she was just such a quiet, good little girl for the entire podcast. I hope that there were some really awesome takeaways for you from this episode and that you learned more about parrot nutrition and their diet and how diverse they need to be. Oh, and one more thing. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. I'm not a licensed avian vet, behaviorist, or professional expert in parrots. The information provided is not intended as a substitute for professional advice from a qualified avian vet, trainer, or behaviorist. Please consult with a specialist for personalized guidance on your specific situation.